Syrian government troops have recaptured about 3/4 of Aleppo territory once held by rebels, putting Bashar al-Assad the closest he's been to an absolute victory there in 4 years. US President-elect Donald Trump breaks protocol by accepting a phone call from Taiwan's leader. South Korea votes to impeach its president, and fake news is becoming a global problem with very real consequences. We'll discuss these stories and more. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. Donald Trump breaks with diplomatic protocol to take a telephone call from Taiwan. But first, the battle for Aleppo. Joining us in our studio is Yuan'an Zhang, Chief U.S. Correspondent for Caixin Media. From New York, we're joined by Raza Rumi, a Pakistani journalist and political commentator. With us from Beirut is Therese, an award-winning journalist and Fulbright Fellow. Also with us in the studio is Said Arikat. Said is the Washington bureau chief of Quds daily. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Anna, let's start with the situation in Syria. Government forces, backed by Russian air power, have largely prevailed. Are we seeing the endgame in this civil war in Syria?
If Assad's forces retake eastern Aleppo, it will certainly be a major tactical and symbolic defeat for the rebels. However, we have to remember that Assad only controls a third of his country at this point. He does not control the entire east, which still has an ISIS stronghold, the northeast, which has a large Kurdish separatist population, and then other swaths that the opposition control. Another note is that Assad's Syrian Arab army make up only a minority of the coalition fighting for East Aleppo right now. So if Assad's foreign backers change their mind or feel any fatigue about this nearly 6-year war, Assad does not have the security capacity to stabilize his own country.
Said, with government forces taking over control of large parts of Aleppo, how much of a defeat is this for United States foreign policy? Because what we've been hearing in Washington throughout the civil war is that Assad must go, and we are backing the rebels.
Yeah, well, for sure, definitely it's a defeat for the stated goal of the United States, because early on they came, and I believe wrongly so, stating that Assad must go and his days were numbered and so on, without really laying out a plan to bring that this goal into fruition or to achieve that goal. So that was wrong to begin with, because they focused on the person of Assad rather than a larger strategy. They were almost became painted into a corner. But I want to take issue with the numbers on the Syrian. I think the large part of those who are fighting for Aleppo are really the Syrian army. Now, you know, Hezbollah may have like a brigade size fighting alongside the Syrian army. The Russians may be giving, advisors and so on. So does Iran and so on. But the bulk of the fighting has been done by the Assad forces, the Syrian army. That's one. Second, it is a major thing because it is the last metropolitan area, the last big urban area that is under the control of the rebels. So when that falls, it's a major, let's say, stride towards not necessarily ending the civil war, but towards achieving a tremendous victory for the Syrian army. They will continue to fight in the Latakia countryside and the Homs countryside and the Hama countryside, but in the urban areas, the fight will regress tremendously.
Yuan'an, China joined Russia at the United Nations Security Council earlier this week and vetoed that resolution which called for a ceasefire in Aleppo to allow aid to get through. What is China's position on what is going on in Syria right now?
The official stance of the Chinese government is that the Syria issue needs a political solution. And I think the Chinese people, from what I read online, they're actually supportive of the China's veto against this ceasefire resolution. Their point is they think there is still a lot of disagreement between the parties. And now have a ceasefire will allow the rebels to have more time to regroup and strengthen. And that would not benefit the Syrians and will not end this war soon.
Right, but clearly we're looking at a military victory here for Bashar al-Assad's forces. Is China looking beyond that to some kind of negotiated solution to the long term in the country?
Yes, I think they will look to the long term, and I think from them, they will think before the United States and the Russia can rebuild some mutual respect and trust towards each other, there will not be solution that can sustain the ceasefire.
Raza, Pakistan has long maintained an alliance with Bashar al-Assad. In fact, many Pakistani volunteers were recruited by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to fight on the side of Bashar al-Assad in the civil war. Why this support for Assad from Pakistan?
Well, I think officially Pakistan has been trying to remain kind of neutral in this. Pakistan did oppose the U.S. sort of intervention earlier when the civil war broke out. But a lot of these volunteers who have gone to Syria are not officially sponsored. They are largely a good number of Pakistani students are studying in seminaries in Iraq and Iran, and they are often recruited to fight the rebels in Syria and the ISIS, most importantly. And then, because I don't know if you know that Pakistan has the second largest Shiite population after Iran. And so there is also a kind of a sectarian religious angle to that. A lot of these fighters want to go and strengthen Assad, whom they see as pitted against ISIS, which is trying to kill the Shiite in both Iraq and Syria. So I think it's more like that. And Pakistan has tried to play a fine balancing act, not to be too partisan, but certainly I think while it must be acknowledged that Assad is brutal and he has perpetrated many a crime against his own people, but you know, I think external interventions rarely help. And in this case, what Syria needs is a functional state before anything else can begin.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, and that is President-elect Donald Trump. Yuan'an, he made that, or rather took that telephone call from the Taiwan leader just a few days ago, breaking with protocol, as we've been saying. Basically, to what extent did he undermine the one China policy that the United States has been following for decades?
I think the current U.S. administration has been clear that the U.S. Government stands by the one China policy, and we haven't heard anything from the Trump the team about this policy. But what I think is it is too soon to judge whether it is a policy change or not. And from, I think the Trump team, what they're doing is kind of sending a mixed signal. For the one thing, they took the call from the Taiwan leader, Tsai Ing-wen. But at the same time, recently, he appoints Terry Branstad as the new ambassador to China, who is considered as an old friend to China. So that suggests that he might want to have a friendly relationship with China and understands how important it is for this bilateral relationship to succeed. And recently, the former U.S. Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, said he was very impressed by the calm reaction from the Chinese leadership about this phone call, which suggests their determination to see whether it is possible to have a calm dialogue between the two parties. So I think for the Chinese part, they're wait to see whether is there an actual policy change.
Wait. Raza, China's Global Times newspaper said that these actions by Trump and the words that he's been saying have been reckless. That's the quote that the Global Times used, reckless, and they must be met head on, the newspaper said. Are we looking at renewed tensions here between China and the United States, or will we see cooler heads prevail once, you know, President-elect Trump becomes President Trump?
Well, I'm quite sure that cooler heads will prevail, and Mr. Trump is not going to make many radical changes to, you know, what the U.S. policy has been for decades now. But certainly he does have his own signature style, and before he formally takes over and the new administration sort of starts governing, Mr. Trump is sending a signal that he has his own style of doing things. And perhaps that may lead to some minor changes, but I don't foresee a major change. However, in the long run, the U.S.-China competition over power globally is bound to increase. I mean, that is one kind of fact of life, the way it is panning out, because China is a rising power, and the U.S. power, even a lot of U.S. thinkers and experts say, is declining in so many ways. So, and Mr. Trump also has a very clear sort of isolationist policy when it comes to global affairs. So it really remains to be seen how this plays out. But I think in the short to medium term, I don't foresee any major change.
Said, what is your view on this?
Well, I think Mr. Trump is utilizing an old-fashioned negotiating tool, that he's leveraging what he has, perhaps trying to extract whatever concessions from China. I don't think it will work in the long term. China is just too important a partner with the United States, and ultimately this policy that is in practice now has been best for both China and the United States, and this is likely to continue.
That's right. It has been referred to as the most important relationship in the world right now. But to Yuan'an's point about what Henry Kissinger said about this, that he was impressed with the calm response of the Chinese government, he also said that he thinks that China is looking to develop what he called a calm dialogue with the new incoming U.S. administration.
Indeed, because this relationship is far too important and involves everything from trade to money to debts and so on, to conflict in the South China Sea. All these things come into play, and it has to remain on a steady course. Otherwise, there's going to be a major crisis globally.
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. Coming up, we'll discuss the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye in South Korea and the real impact of fake news. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.